Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And today I just wanted to talk about the books that I've been reading this week. A lot of it is actually sort of translated fiction, but let's get on talking a bit about this together. First up, we have recent Nobel Prize winner Kang with The White Book, translated by Deborah Smith. And this I thought was a really beautiful piece of writing. It's not really like anything I've read in some ways. I mean, it sort of maybe reminds me a little bit of some other authors who've written about colour. And I just thought this was really clever. So essentially the core idea is an examination of the colour white and doing so through various essentially little set pieces. You sort of see as you go through the book that it's quite sparse on the page. And as it continues on, and at first there are these almost mini mysteries that are going on of a person is being spoken about and it's being written in this way that feels like somewhere between fiction and non-fiction. But, you know, because it sort of presents like a novel, you basically treat it like one for a lot of the book. And without spoiling anything about how this book moves its arguments along, we soon become aware that there is slightly more of a non-fictional element going on as well. And so I think this book is just so beautiful in the way that it examines various things and really the whole gamut of human experience through the colour white. From people wearing certain dresses or there being rituals around certain things, around, you know, life or death or marriage, through various other sort of more intimate parts of conversation, of somebody talking about a small thing that they remember from when they were a child, all these sorts of things. And the book then brings it towards this conclusion that's just so interesting. And I really, yeah, this is really quite exceptional. I've got Human Acts by Kang also coming from the library soon, and I'm really excited to read a bit more of hers because she's just such a fascinating author, I think. Next up, we have Prairie, Dresses, Art, Other by Danielle Dutton. And this is another book that in many ways blurs those lines between fiction and non-fiction. There are some short stories at the beginning of this book that are somewhat surreal and odd and strange and all of those sorts of things, talking about nature and just sort of taking this idea of the prairie as a central piece to look at various other things about humankind, which were all really fascinating. I really loved the writing of it. I thought they were really rich and detailed. But then the rest of this book does other things. So one part of this book, Art, is a longer essay. Dresses takes parts of other pieces of fiction and non-fiction about whatever and takes lines that are to do with dresses. And then Other has just sort of other bits of her writing. And this somehow comes together as this sort of compilation of writing that is so interesting because it's essentially variations on a similar theme. And so some of the things that come up in the essay work alongside the short stories and vice versa. And so this is quite a strange and really quite beautiful book. It's just recently been longlisted rather for the Gordon Byrne Prize. And I can see why. I think this is a really exceptional piece of writing. It's so daring and bold. And in many ways, sort of something that only really an indie press would take this big a gamble on. So I thought it was great. I thought this was a really great book. Next up, we have History, a Mess by Sigrún Pálsdóttir and translated by Lytton Smith. And this, again, I just thought was a really wild, interesting piece of writing. And particularly, again, indie presses do this in many ways better than other people. But the core idea is a young woman is doing her PhD, and as part of her PhD, she's researching this one person, and she, from reading a diary entry that they have written years before, this is a person from hundreds of years ago, she believes that they might be the first female artist in, I think it's, yeah, in their country. And the logic that she uses to pass it out is somewhat tenuous, but it allows for a discussion within her PhD thesis. And what follows on from the rest of this book is essentially digging through historical records and realizing that she might not be right. But the way this book sums that up and brings this to a conclusion, I thought was really clever, in that it allows for variations on the same truth to be both real and not real at the same time. which sounds very vague, I realise, but it makes a lot more sense when you read the book. And I just thought this was really fun and a good read as well. So yeah, really glad to be getting through some of the indie books that I've had on my shelf for a little while now. Keeping up with indie presses and particularly Prairie press again, Body Kintsugi by Senka Marić and translated by Celia Hawkesworth. And this is a really personal and beautiful book. It focuses on somebody who's essentially dealing with cancer, and the book uses that to essentially have a wider conversation about the body and its role in our sense of self, but also takes this idea, the Japanese idea of kintsugi, where in repairing something you make it more beautiful by using gold lacquer and various other things. And she thinks about this in terms of her body, that scars or cuts or whatever that will be present on her body create this kind of kintsugi effect where it allows her body to be the sum of its experiences. But what I think is interesting as well is the book is written entirely in the second person, talking about bodies and health, and so there's something quite startling about about thinking about yourself within this, and the book invites you in but also to some degree holds you off whilst talking about a lot of this illness. I thought it was really sensitively and cleverly handled, and it feels both like fiction and non-fiction at the same time, and is really almost all the better for that as well. And last but not least, we have Eliza Clark with She's Always Hungry. And this is a collection of short stories where essentially she takes tropes around body horror, body image, and various other things about the wider world, particularly things around diet culture or what have you, and spins these slightly, so not even slightly, these grisly, quite gruesome stories about this. So the title story has this whole conversation around hunger and desire and the policing of women's bodies. It also does so many other things. It focuses on these really interesting parts about the grisly psychology behind that. And essentially it takes the idea of diet culture, of various things about the body and what have you, and pushes them to their extremes to turn them into this weird body horror thing. And I think this is a really successful collection. I loved Boy Parts and Penance by Eliza Clark, and so I'm starting to just feel that she's maybe an author I really get on with. And her ability, I think, to go into the deepest, darkest things and create these short stories that are both funny and utterly unsettling is really quite special. There are some really tragic and really beautiful moments in these short stories, some really funny, silly moments where it's just absurd, and then these other moments that are just utterly tragic and heartbreaking. I think this is, yeah, a really solid collection. I really, really greatly enjoyed this. So those have been the books that I've been reading this week. I hope you're doing really well. I'm realising increasingly that the Booker project is not going to be finished by the end of this year, just because there are still so many to go. I've been a bit, I was off for a bit because I was just ill, and I'm better now, which is great, but it meant I just had all this bit of time where I just couldn't really read or focus properly. So the Booker project is still very much ticking along, but I think it'll probably be very early next year that it'll all be done. But that's all fine. I don't want to rush them. And there are plenty of really interesting books that I want to read now anyway. I'm getting into the stage of the year as well where I'm doing my best of, so very soon I'll have my next few videos out about yeah, my favourite books of the year. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you're reading, and I hope you're not too hectic with holiday season things, or that kind of pre-holiday season thing as well. Anyway, all my best, take care, and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.